back to my channel. My name is Sydney, and if you're new here, I make a lot of bookish content, and I absolutely love turning my favorite books into custom hardcover editions. This is a hobby that I started early last year, and it's slowly started to consume my life, and I've actually had a ton of questions from you guys on what kind of tools that I use to rebind my books. So today, I'm going to walk you through all of the tools that you need to rebind your books into hardcover editions, and I'll be breaking it up into tools that are nice to have and then tools you absolutely need to have to take your books from this to this. And to make it easy for you, I've created a document with all the supplies that I use with links on where to buy everything, and that document is in the description below. That way, if you're wanting to get into this hobby, you can basically just add everything to your cart and get it shipped to you and you're good to go. Okay, let's jump right in. So starting with the tools that you do need to rebind your books, the first one is mole cloth. It looks a little bit like cheesecloth, but we use it to reinforce the spine of your book just to make it stronger after you've removed the original cover. It gives extra strength and stability to the binding of your spine, that way it lasts longer over time. Next up is PVA glue. This is the type of glue that most bookbinders use in their projects, and the reason why is because it's acid-free, super easy to work with. It dries fairly quickly, but not too quickly. And it also dries clear and flexible, which is important for your book. And it also stands the test of time so that you know your custom book covers are going to last for years no matter what. And if you're on a budget, which I plan to make a future video sometime about bookbinding on a budget, you could technically use Elmer's glue. Just know that it won't last as long and it might be a little bit trickier to work with. And the next thing is a brush. I personally love to use silicone paint brushes when I'm bookbinding because I find that it's a lot easier to spread the glue when you're using silicone versus a bristle brush. When I first started rebinding my books, I was using a bristle brush, but I found that it just sucked up a lot of glue and was wasting quite a bit of the product. So once I switched to silicone, it was just a lot easier to use. And I'm not gonna lie, something about when the glue dries, ripping it off of the silicone brush is just so satisfying to me, and it's honestly a plus in my opinion. You'll also need a cutting mat. This is super crucial to protect your working space when you're bookbinding because you will be making a lot of cuts and you want a durable surface to cut on. I get mine from Amazon. That's also linked in the document in the description. But Michael's or any other craft store also has some good options. I found that the one on Amazon is just a bit more affordable. So definitely get one of these. You'll want to save your desk or your space from getting all scratched up. Then you are going to need a bone folder. This is a classic tool for any bookbinder. What this does is it allows you to get very clean folds when you're folding paper, creating creases in book cloth, smoothing things over. It's a small tool and it doesn't seem like it'll do a lot, but I actually use mine quite frequently through the rebinding process. You'll also need some binder's board. This is called chipboard in some places. And what you'll use this for is actually creating the hardcover of your book. And what's important is the thickness of your board. You want it to be thick enough that it's going to be sturdy, but not too thick where it's difficult to cut through. The binder's board that I buy from Amazon is, I believe, 2 millimeters thick, which is pretty standard. And for cutting through your binder's board, you're going to need an X-Acto knife. You want one that's definitely sharp, otherwise you're going to be making several passes. I've also heard that you could cut binder's board with a Cricut. I haven't ventured into that. I don't necessarily know how that's done. I might try to figure out in the future, but I just find that measuring my lines and using an X-Acto blade to cut through just makes it easier to control and work with. Next up is scissors. I assume that most people have a pair of scissors in their home. Pretty basic, but of course you're gonna be using it for cutting fabric, cutting paper, trimming details. So make sure you have a pair of those on hand as well. Then we have book cloth. Book cloth is what covers your book and gives it that linen or leather feel. I personally buy mine from Hollander's, which is an online bookbinding store, but you can also find it on Amazon. What's important is that your fabric has a paper backing. That's what makes it book cloth, because the paper backing is what you glue onto the case or the cover of your book, and that paper backing allows the cloth to glue onto the book without the glue seeping through. You can also technically make your own book cloth if you go to a fabric store and purchase any fabric, and then you would make sure that you have acid-free tissue paper and iron on the tissue paper to the back of your fabric using heat and bond. I have tried this in the past and it sort of worked, but it didn't. I'm sure there's a much better way to do it than I did. But there's a really good tutorial on YouTube that you can follow if you want to make your own book cloth, and I've linked that in the list of supplies in the description as well. And then you'll want to pick up some decorative cardstock for your end papers. The end papers are the inside when you open your book, and it's really fun to pick out cool designs that match the story or even just plain colors. You can honestly make these look however you want. One of my favorite parts of rebinding my books is picking out the end papers because I feel like it's just fun to match the vibe to the book. I definitely recommend getting 12 by 12 sheets. That way, no matter what the size of your book, you can usually cut them down to size because they will be folded in half since that's how they're inserted into your book. I usually get my end papers from Hobby Lobby. I find they have a really big selection. You can also find some good ones from Amazon or Michael's or honestly just any craft store. You'll also need regular cardstock. I just use plain white cardstock to create that spine hinge. Thickness doesn't necessarily matter. You can just buy regular cardstock that's a little bit sturdier than paper and you'll be just fine. What's important is that it's sturdy enough to hold the spine, front, and back pieces together, but also flexible enough to open the book easily. Okay, now let's go over some tools that aren't necessarily required but are really nice to have if you're rebinding your books. These things, of course, aren't necessary to spend your money on, but they do make the whole process a bit easier and they add a little bit extra touch to your designs. The first one is a book press. You could purchase a book press on Amazon, but I honestly just went to Home Depot and bought a few supplies to make my own. I think I spent less than $20 on the whole thing. It works really well. If you are bookbinding something from scratch, like a fan fiction, for example, a book press is pretty important, I would say, because you do need to press the signatures together to remove any air bubbles. But if you're just rebinding books and you already have a completed text block for the most part, you could technically just use heavy objects on top of your book when it's finished to make sure it lays flat and compressed. I also find that it's just convenient to have a book press available so you can hold your text block steady while you're working on the spine. And the next thing is a cutting machine like a Cameo or a Cricut. This is definitely a splurge, but I have found that it is completely elevated the look of my designs. I have been able to do so much more with my book covers using heat transfer vinyl because I have a cutting machine that will actually cut out those really precise and intricate designs. So if you want your cover to look professional, it's totally worth it. I have the Cameo Silhouette 4. I got it on sale, I think from Amazon when it was a couple $100s. The Cameo is still a more affordable option than the Cricut, so if you don't want to invest in a Cricut, which can be upwards of $400 for some of them, a Cameo is a really good alternate option. I found it works the exact same way. I've had my Cameo for a little under a year and I have absolutely loved everything about it. Whether you get a Cameo or a Cricut, for any cutting machine you will need some weeding tools if you're working with heat transfer vinyl to weed out the outside of your design. Speaking of heat transfer vinyl, this is definitely a must-have if you plan to make cover designs using a cutting machine. Again, it's not required. There are ways to get pretty book covers without investing in all this, but it does look the best. So heat transfer vinyl comes in all types of colors and finishes. I really love working with metallic vinyl. You can find heat transfer vinyl at Amazon, Walmart, Michael's. Again, any craft store will have some available. When it comes to metallic vinyl, I personally prefer the Cricut brand. I find it's just easier to work with. It sticks onto your book a lot better. But for smooth finish that's not necessarily metallic, it's more like a matte feel, I prefer the Sizer brand. I feel like that one's a lot easier to weed and work with. Another tool that's nice to have is a heat press. I got the mini heat press from Joann's. It's the Cricut brand, and I find this is so easy to work with. It's just a mini little iron, technically, that you can use to iron your heat transfer vinyl designs onto the cover of your book. And again, this isn't necessarily required. It's just really nice to have. It makes that transfer process a lot easier. You technically could use just an iron to do this process, but I don't know how foolproof that is because I personally haven't tried it myself, so I can't recommend it. But I do know that it's been done, and if you're on a budget, that could be a really good alternate option. Next is a paper cutter. This is so game changer and time saving when it comes to cutting your paper with very clean, precise lines. You might already have one of these on hand. They're a very common scrapbooking item, but if you don't, you could totally find this honestly anywhere. Amazon is a good place to check. Again, I have everything linked in a doc in the description. Another tool that's super handy is a 90-degree angle ruler. ruler. I use this all the time just for measuring, lining up my book board to make sure everything is straight and being glued together in a very clean way. Another thing that I really love is my T-spacer that my husband 3D printed for me. I haven't yet found a really good reliable place to purchase this from. When I do, I'll definitely update the list in the description. Having some sort of spacer for attaching your front and back pieces to the whole case is really good just to make sure things are lined up properly, because when you're rebinding your book and you're making the cover, it's so important to make sure that lines are straight, that you're measuring, triple measuring. And when you have tools like this, just to make lining everything up easier, it saves you so much time and stress. And then we have headbands. Another thing that's not technically required, but it's super nice to have. Most bookbinders do add headbands to their projects. I find that headbands really just tie the whole look together. They do tend to hide the spine at the top and the bottom to just give it this finished look. And it's fun to match the headbands to the inside of your book or the outside of your book. They're super cheap and affordable, but you can also make your own headbands if you wanted to out of book cloth. I have a tutorial on this, which I'll link in the description. Another very important tool is a ruler, more specifically a cork-backed ruler. And the reason why I recommend using a cork-backed ruler is because there are going to be a lot of times where you are cutting paper or binder's board with your X-Acto knife, and you'll need to use the ruler to line up your cuts. But if you're not using a cork-backed ruler, chances are your ruler will slide around, messing up those lines, and they won't be straight. So the cork-backed ruler helps the ruler to stay in place. You can use it as a good sturdy placeholder for getting those clean lines. Okay, and that is everything that I use to turn my books into custom hardcover editions. And whether you're new to bookbinding or rebinding your books, or if you have been doing this for a while, I hope this has been helpful just to get you started and to figure out what is actually needed and maybe what's not needed but nice to have. I know that when I started my bookbinding journey, I was scouring the internet for just some sort of compilation of the tools that I needed, that I could know I wasn't wasting my money, because there were a few things that I bought in the beginning that I just ended up not needing. And let's be honest, there are a lot of tools and materials that go into the process of rebinding or bookbinding. It can be overwhelming. So hopefully this was helpful to kind of put it all full circle for you and give you a really good accessible way to start. And if you're interested in just going all in or picking up any of these tools, don't forget that I have a full list of tools linked in my description with links to where to buy everything, whether it's Amazon, Michael's, wherever. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, because I will definitely be making more bookbinding tutorial type videos in the future. Leave a comment and let me know if you have any questions, what kind of videos you'd like to see from me coming up, and until then, happy bookbinding!